From the center of the galaxy, this is ForceCenter, show about Star Wars, pop culture, and the ultimate adventure, life and business. I'm Ken Napzok.
I'm Joseph Scrimshaw.
And I'm Jennifer Landa.
And we are here for a special edition, a breaking news from now. Often we do breaking news from a long time ago. We did that episode actually probably earlier today if you're watching, and we had recorded that. As often, it's the ForceCenter curse that we put an episode together and then some news happens. A lot of times it's joyful news, it's happy news, it's something we want to get back in the studio and discuss. Today we are here to discuss the news around Acolyte, that the story came out yesterday that there is not going to be a second season. It was framed by Deadline as a cancellation. We're going to dive into all that here today. First, before we get into it, I think, Joseph, we should test the temperature where we're feeling overall.
Yeah, I'm super upset that there isn't going to be a second season of Acolyte. I had some ups and downs with the show itself. 90 to 95% loved it, but some of the stuff that I wrestled with was really what's next, because I felt like it told a chapter of a story, but particularly in terms of who are Osha and May? Where do they truly end up when they get to make choices? Can they escape the destiny that the Sith and the Jedi seem to want them in their organizations? When they escape that, if they escape that, who will they be? That I felt like that big picture story, the heart of it was incomplete. Well, we got this very beautiful, tragic, complete story of the tragedy of Brendok, the tragedy of Jedi Master Soul. Those central characters, May and Osha, felt like they were left, in my opinion, still a little bit trapped. And I really wanted to finish that story. So for me, there's just as a Star Wars fan, to sit down and watch, I'm bummed out about it. And then I think, as we're going to acknowledge, it's such a complex time in the industry for how the streaming shows are evaluated. And the Acolyte is a show that I think there's a responsibility, once Lucasfilm decided to do the show, to be aware that they're creating a show that is got a lot of diversity and inclusion in front of and behind the camera, and as such became a target. And it's not just another Star Wars show. It's an important show, and it needs to be discussed with I think some amount of emotional intelligence. And so it's a complex topic. That's where I'm at as a Star Wars fan, and then really aware of how complex and business related and social related this show is.
I think that's a great 360-degree kind of overall view. I think you've touched on everything that's kind of running through a lot of people's minds and hearts. As a Star Wars fan, it's just a bummer when anything doesn't move on. And I'm with you. We discussed it every week. Things I loved. I loved the discussions around it. Some things, maybe. But all that kind of is part of the conversation. But my mind immediately went to business. My mind immediately went to, well, that's it. The industry's kind of dead. And I'm just kind of, a lot of us are feeling it. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about streaming and the streaming wars maybe being over and everyone lost. But also, I like what you said there at the end before I pass it to you, Jen, of regardless of the decisions, this show represented a lot to a lot of people who for years have been seeking a better representation. They got it both behind the screen and on the screen. And so therefore, no matter what the decision is, even if it is truly just a business decision, which I will say probably has a lot to do with it, they have to be aware of what the loss is right now to a lot of fans who in our own Discord, you can see it. There's a lot of just pain. There's pain beyond just a show. This was beyond just a show for a lot of folks, Jed, and getting your overall thoughts here, I'm sure, like Joseph and I, will be complex in many.
Yes. As a fan, I'm sad. I really, really love this show. I loved the characters. I love the risks that the show took. It felt very fresh and exciting and unpredictable, which is not often that happens to me as a Star Wars fan. I feel like I can often kind of map out what's going to happen, especially with canon things. But this show kept me on my toes. However, being in the entertainment industry for 20 something years, I am very aware of where this business was and how this business has changed. And it's one of the reasons why I'm leaving the entertainment industry, because the business has changed so much. And we're going to dive into that. So at the same time, I get it. it's just business. It's just money. It is what it is. And we're going to move on from it. However, what I'm really wrestling with and having problems with is the discourse that has been swirling around this show from the moment that the cast was announced. We've been on this track as we have been on since 2015 with John Boyega and even Daisy Ridley as Rey. And it just feels like, good Lord, can we get off of this toxic hamster wheel? Enough. So we're going to go there. But yeah, that's my thought.
We're going to go there indeed. No, toxic hamster wheel. Yeah, claustrophobic feeling just from you saying that. I'm losing my voice today. This is why I don't record on Tuesdays. Let's get into it here. Like I said, midday Monday, Deadline ran an exclusive story that proclaimed the Acolyte was canceled. The Variety, folks at Variety and the Hollywood Reporter also put some stuff out there. We'll touch on that. The Deadline report was, I'll say, simple and direct, but while providing some facts about the show's viewership falling rapidly after its strong first 2 episodes. However, this was presented, and I don't know, maybe it's my perspective on it. However, this was presented as having to do with the show, quote, dividing fans and only carrying a 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's the critic score. We know it was lower, around 18% for the audience, but no further exploration or explanations was made about that. Variety, as we'll discuss, went a little bit deeper. Jen, you reminded me of the Hollywood Reporter, put out a story as well, including some quotes from Hedlund in June. That we will bring into the conversation as needed. But I do want to start with you, Jenna, about how do we think about how this news was found out, how it was discovered by fans, and how it was presented here in this story?
Shout out to the folks on our Discord who actually broke the news to me, sharing the Deadline article that it was canceled. And I was like, what? Canceled? Not at the surprise of the fact that it's not going to have a season 2, but that a season 2 was never announced. There, as far to my knowledge, there was no pre-production in place with this show. And as we all know, the term canceled is used when a show like the Clone Wars is in production. Stuff is happening, stuff is moving, but nothing had been moving. So why are you using the word canceled? It was a very deliberate choice, which is kind of where my mind went. And rightfully so, because on Twitter, the narrative was it was canceled because the show was trash, because the show was woke. And it just really fed into that toxic portion of the fan base. And the actual article itself did not mention any sort of cancellation language. Like you're saying, they didn't point to, the business decisions. They kind of were just laying out the facts of how it was, the low scores and things like that. So I don't know. I just felt like it gave more fuel to the fire unnecessarily. And I think, as we're going to talk about, the way that we talk about this show is important. The language that we use is important. And using the word canceled is inflammatory. And I think it was clear why that word was chosen. And that's to get clicks on their news article.
Yeah, it's part of where the entertainment journalism side is and has been for a while, where they're fighting for those clicks too. And that's not me saying it's right, not me saying it's wrong. It's just saying that's kind of where we are, where this kind of leads to kind of things like this, which I think are careless and clunky. And there's a lot of folks reading this going, oh, yeah, it was. Yeah. It did lose numbers. It did lose ratings. So therefore, that's a good reason to get rid of it, which, again, it might be part of a business discussion. But I'm talking about the folks just at their lunch table reading the story online going, yeah, and they don't even get the full picture. We have to discuss the full picture as well. Joseph, bringing you in here about this isn't just that where were you, but like how it was presented, where your thoughts go on the story and how it broke.
Yeah, I think it's telling that it broke very fast. I think I get the feeling that maybe that word was canceled, which I entirely agree with you, Jen, is sort of incorrect nomenclature. Not renewed was used later, and I think that's better because yes. But I wonder if it was that that the show was maybe leaning forward and there was a precipice of moving forward and then a decision not to move forward. The article was written clearly very fast because they've corrected it now, but very painfully. It had all of the straightforward information about not being renewed. And then it had its boilerplate information about the Acolyte at the bottom, which was all written in the present tense of
yes.
The Acolyte is a show. And by this morning, it was corrected to the Acolyte was. Very sad and very painful, but to me, like evidence of this is fast breaking news. I tend to think that this is a decision that was made very recently by Disney, by Lucasfilm, and that I have no evidence for this, but I feel like uh, big companies don't put out press releases. They don't have fun events at D23 going come to our panel to find out what's not moving forward and why. It's not in their interest. They know they're going to take a hit and they need to move forward. And this has the feeling to me, again, total, just my opinion, of they want to move on to Skeleton Crew. There was indecision about the Acolyte for them to have highlighted Manny Jacinto at D23 so recently in their own press release to describe that Manny's going to talk about season 1 of the Acolyte. We talked about that being hopeful. So to me, there's a lot of signs of this was on the cusp at Disney Lucasfilm. They made the decision. They're taking the negative hit, and hopefully they're hoping that it clears in a week or two. And now we can all just look forward to talking about Skeleton Crew and Mando and Grogu.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I want to acknowledge, too, that even at the time of the recording, there's a lot of, my sources say stories out there that some things had moved forward, something, I've even heard some of that as well. We all live and work in this town. That all may be true, and that all may come out in the wash, but you also have to deal with what's presented. The lack of transparency gets brought up a lot in these corporations. I don't know too many corporations that are fully transparent, so I think we should still keep calling for that across many industries. I don't think we're necessarily going to get it, but we're dealing with what we know right now, and I want people, because I know it's going to come in the comment section. The band Hammer Trigger will be out about that kind of stuff. Could be additional stories. Leslie Headland herself could be someone who says, "Hey, let me tell you the scoop." And there's also this is all Filoni. He only is going to greenlight Mandoverse. None of that necessarily is true, but we're dealing with what we have now. This is we're at the end of the fourth quarter business, financial year. All those kind of horrible, cold realities that are tearing this industry down brick by brick are at play here, I think. But just trying to deal with the news, it came across my wire, so to speak, and it's just. Disappointment that another a project could die that doesn't go forward in any way, like Book of Boba Fett, Kenobi, which is love to see more. Having to fight for Ahsoka season 2, they hear. I just sad for a lot of people that had, I think, a lot more story to tell, both behind the camera and on the camera as well. So we talked a little bit about in the opening about what we feel about the actual news. There's no second season of Acolyte. What do we do with the plot points left unresolved? What do we do with the story? Just as fans, and we'll get into more of the business stuff and maybe even more serious stuff here. But I did want to stop off because that's also one of my first thoughts is, okay, we won't know that. Blank, blank, blank. Jen, Joseph, anyone? Sorry.
Please, Jen.
Yeah, no, when I started thinking about it, I was like, oh man, we are not going to get that storyline of why Plagueis was lurking in the shadows. That moment at the end of the show, now of the series of Kynir and Osha going forward together potentially. What does that mean? Was she going to really go to the dark side? How is she going to come back if not? I'm just sad that we won't see more of the witches, which I believe that they were going to come back in some form or fashion, because I thought that was the best representation of witches in Star Wars since the Clone Wars. What was Vernestra Rowe going to tell Yoda? Like, there's just so many fun questions. And I saw some people online that were arguing with me, saying, well, that's why the show was canceled, why we can use the word cancel, because there were so many cliffhangers. And why would the creators have brought out these questions without answering them? I'm like, well, I don't know. Did you watch Russian Doll? Like, Leslie Headland had a ton of questions, and some were answered and some were not. So I don't know. It's just very sad. Very, very sad. I still haven't recovered from Willow's cancellation.
And removal. And complete
removal.
Wiping from existence. Yes.
Yeah. I don't think that they'll remove the Acolyte because it is Star Wars. I don't think that they would dare, but it was kind of crazy. I mean, to get rid of that show. Totally.
Yeah.
I think everybody saw David Zaslav doing it and thought, ooh, that's a thing we can do. And I think the amount of successful fury and even government interest in that can't be a legal business. You can't, you cannot be in the business of not making things. There's been some sword rattling from senators and Congress people. So I really hope that that is not going to continue to be a thing for streamers, especially on something as high profile as a Star Wars show.
Yeah, or a Batgirl movie or anything like that. I
Yeah.
agree with that. Joseph, I mean, in a weird way, almost, I don't want this question to come off as trivial about what are we going to do with it, but it's part of the pain. It's part of the process of going through this news for a lot of fans that this show meant the world to them. So that's why I want to stop off and talk about what you think about just the actual idea of no second season for the Acolyte.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I rewatch it, it's going to be interesting to rewatch it as a chapter of a story of this is the tragedy of Brendok, the tragedy of Jedi Master Soul. This is in my opinion, the tragedy of two sisters who keep getting caught in organizations and can't quite get to what do they truly choose for themselves. In my opinion, and other people have different interpretations of Osha's choices at the end, and I respect that. But for me, that's the story. It's like it's a Romeo and Juliet tragedy where there's mistakes, there's human emotional mistakes made of pain and trauma, and there are those like frustrating lack of communication tragedies. And I feel like it is this complete chapter in the story. But I agree with everything that Jennifer rolled out about what was forward moving about the narrative of Osha and the Stranger literally looking to the future, knowing that they can't possibly have a great future, even as Sith, because Darth Plagueis is lurking physically, literally. What is the future of May with the Jedi is something we haven't discussed as much. Like, does she get her memory back? Does Vernestra try to make things right by making May her Padawan? Does she start the Jedi Temple on fire? All these questions with her fate. The literal last image of, Vernestra, I believe, is going to bring Yoda into the knowledge of a dark side force, maybe Sith, is out there. How are we going to handle it? That's unresolved. To me, I think it is a little bit up to Leslie Headland as the core creator. Does that continue in books? Does that continue in comics? Does that continue in audio adventures? Or is that nope, I'm going to fight and hold out for, a live show down the line? Who knows? I think the other thing that I want to bring up quickly is, and this aligns into the business side of it, which we'll get into. There's the forward moving what was going to happen next. And then there was the active choice to have a bunch of teases about really interesting and compelling backstory for the characters. And in some ways, that's what I'm most frustrated by, to have left that many fascinating little time bombs of backstory. For example, what exactly is the story of Osha and May's creation? They have that conversation between themselves in the final episode of who taught us that rhyme, hinting that there's even more to it in its connection to maybe Plagueis. What is the history between Chimere and Vernestra? How did they fall out? What did Chimere do? How did he end up with those scars? There's a very underlying mystery of Chimere being a Jedi from a long time ago, and Osha wouldn't have known him at the Jedi Temple. So how is that possible? He looks 32. What's the deal? What is the connection to Kylo Ren to use his theme beyond the thematic? Because that was discussed a lot in interviews. Is Plagueis allowing Chimere to train a pupil, or did Plagueis reject Chimere? And Chimere doesn't know that he's lurking there in Cave Town. What is the fate of Mother Coral? Is she the only witch that survived? That's maybe forward looking. What was the ascension really? What would have happened had Soul not intervened? What was that actual ritual? We still don't entirely know that. So for me, a part of the frustration is that I was really interested in all those characters in their truths, and what's going to happen to those stories is also as frustrating to me as what would have happened in the next chapter.
Yeah, you're putting a lot of great things on the table there that I think you can look at the show, like you said, the tragedy of Brendok, and there's some complete things in it, right? And there's some things we can say, well, we know 100 years from now we get to Phantom Menace, and maybe we can fill in some blanks. But what you're selling to me, Joseph, is a world around the show was definitely created and being formed. And I'm not necessarily talking about actual pen to paper or fingers to keyboards for season 2 of scripts. I'm just talking about there was enough around this to build in many directions. We also know there were some books announced going in the
Right.
going backward there to look. We totally understand that. But yeah, I think that's where some of the story-wise is a loss for me. Of just even some of the threads that I myself have not, I don't want to say challenged, but like, okay, where are you going with this? Where are you going with, the Sith of it all, or the Jedi fall, and how the politics is Red Court a good guy, bad guy, or somewhere in between, like all that stuff. I was excited to see explored in a second season or beyond. So this is kind of unique territory for a Star Wars fan. We've all had shows we love get canceled. We've all had shows kind of end where you're like, whoa, that's it? That's the end? And some suit pulled the plug on this show? We do not know. That's happened many times over, just as a TV fan my whole life. We've all experienced that, but it's kind of unique to Star Wars as all these shows and all these things came out. We talked off air. Yeah, you could look at Solo, Star Wars Story, and Maul and Kira, but I think outside of that, the movie was contained enough to where it still feels like a complete meal. Some tantalizing appetizers to come, but this feels like the first ever rug pulled out from a section of the Star Wars chapter. We'll have this. This doesn't minimize the effects of the show, the story, the things that the inspirations, the questions that you took from it. I think what this show meant to a lot of people will remain. But I do feel, without going forward, there's a lot that will never.
Yeah, and there's tip of the iceberg storytelling where like, ooh, a fun thing is mentioned, and you go, ooh, I'd like to hear that sometimes. To me, this isn't what I ever mean by tip of the iceberg storytelling. It means these are fundamental things of who is Chimera really? Who is the stranger really? Who truly wronged him and made him the way he is? Those are much more fundamental to me than Obi-Wan mentioned the Clone Wars, and I would like to know what that is someday. Those are kind of different things to me. Can we talk just a minute about the business side of it?
Yeah,
because that for me really ties into the sort of unanswered questions.
Yeah.
I had a lovely lunch with a friend who has in the past, not right now, worked for a streamer, and he kind of confirmed some of the truths that I think a lot of us perceive, that the streamers hate second and third seasons because they get more expensive because it is the normal negotiating for writers, actors, everybody to get paid a little bit more. Even if it's a modest bump, they become more expensive. On traditional television, as shows become more popular, like, well, the third season of 30 Rock is worth more now because it won all those Golden Globes, and now more people are watching, and all that. With streamers, traditionally defining their value only by the number of subscribers and then dividing that up based on hours watched to shows and assigning a obscure financial value to a show, it makes them even more reticent to do a second and a third season. And in my opinion, many showrunners and creators have responded to that by, I get my shot at a first season, I will write tantalizing cliffhangers so that the audience will demand a second season. So the crap with that for me is there is nowhere for people who love the show to vote, to put our energy. Back in the day when it was based on advertisers, and you need to show the right number of right amount of interest, so Chevrolet will keep buying things. People could do wild things like send in walnuts and say renew Jericho, and then Chevy's like, all these people with the walnuts. Okay, that I don't think that's working right now because the social media numbers, the engagement numbers are valuable to outside sources to guess the numbers. Disney knows the numbers. The social media engagement numbers are valuable to people who are trying to reverse engineer what Disney already knows. So us making a lot of noise, I don't think moves the needle for Disney because they already know the numbers. They already know how many people actually like it. My friend was telling me he had nothing to do, the streamer he worked with, he had nothing to do with the choice to renew shows. But people would just find him on LinkedIn and see that he worked for a streamer that canceled the show and yell at him on LinkedIn because they had nowhere else for their voice to go. And that was really demonstrative to me of the problem of the cycle between business, creator, audience. The communication cycle is broken. And I think for myself, until that, it's the business's responsibility to fix it. But until they do, I think showrunners should stop falling for the trap of write a cliffhanger. Because right now in the streaming world, I don't think the audience has a voice to respond to it. So it just leaves everyone frustrated, in my opinion. So that's my take on the business side of it and how it affects the story going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of the end of Willow had a lot of things left unfinished, and literally put a first book on the shelf and grabbed a second book and kind of got you excited. It's sad, and I get it. It hurts. But Jen, talking about business, you're someone who is well, you've been in this business, as Joseph and I have too. But the last few years, you've faced some different challenges. Thoughts on some of the business side of it here?
Yeah, I think that the issue is with the review bombing. I think that that is a real issue, and I think it does make studios. Sorry, my dog keeps barking. It makes studios scared, right? Because even though it may be a minority of fans, unfortunately, it's reflected in the numbers. So I think that that needs to be fixed or dealt with. I don't know how. And I was talking off air with you guys, and I'll share it here. I think that the issue is that I'm going to say the rebels, the good side, the non-toxic side of fans, we kind of just be like, well, we accept the fate. The other side, they're mobilized. They are online all the time. A lot of them are using bots to spew their hate, to review bomb, to do all these things and target the creators, target the actors. And I mean, look at what happened with Kenobi, where Ewan McGregor had to come out in defense of Moses Ingram, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is wrong. We somehow need to figure out a way to mobilize as a community and spread positivity. And whether or not you liked the Acolyte, I'm not going to argue with you. You are entitled to your opinion. However, what the Acolyte represents to not just Star Wars fans, but to our society, to where we want to head to as a society, which is a much more inclusive society, it is important for us to rally around it and lift it up and be like, hey, we want more shows like this. We are not going to be stuck in the 1950s or even 80s, quite frankly. We're ready to move beyond that. And people want to spend money on that. People want to watch that. So I don't know how we combat the negativity, but we have to do something. We are the spark that lights fire.
Well,
right?
I think you're making a good argument for continuing to be vocal on social media when we love something and when it's important.
But I feel like
I don't like.
I think that's the problem. Like I look, that's what's so maddening. I see for people specifically on Threads, fans who are on Threads, were saying, you just brought out Manny Jacinto at a D23 panel. You announced him at Star Wars Celebration. They've been vocal about how much they love this show. So many fans memeing and sharing their thirst traps and whatever it is, right? There was a lot of that towards the end of the show.
Horde, yeah.
Yeah, your word,
Jackie Jam,
right?
Yeah.
There was a whole online spread of just love for this show, and it feels like that is not valued and ignored. I understand that it's the business side of it, right? But I think the optics of it makes it feel like the fans that did care about this show, that their voice does not matter. And I think it's really important going forward to get ahead of that. And whoever leaked this, shame on you. Shame on you for feeding that toxic fan base, because it did, whether intentional or not, it fed into that and just kind of validated that hatred, quite frankly, and that prejudice and ignorance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally hear what you're saying about the people who love the show and are being positive on social media not feeling heard. I think that kind of dovetails with the sort of the frustration on the business side of it, of like, we're the consumers. Can we please vote? But I also am moved by the fact that the show, before it even came close to premiering, was being targeted by racist, sexist, homophobes, xenophobes, general bad faith hate mongers who may or may not even ever watch Star Wars. Just it was targeted from the beginning. And I know people had to deal with lots of horrible stuff when they're talked about it, but I did see a lot of just positivity. And I think that has a social value as well, that, not going to be frightened off of talking about a thing we love because of all of these awful people. So I feel really bad that the people who love it and talked about it vocally on social media don't feel heard. But I'm also grateful that people, endured
Yes.
the awfulness in order to shine the light, right?
Mhm.
Because it's the easiest thing to go, I enjoyed this episode of Acolyte, but I don't want to deal with the crappy comments I'm going to get today, so I'm not going to say it. And I think it is powerful that there are this many people who are like, I'm putting my light out there. I love this show, and I'm not going to be scared off from talking about it, which I think is that part of it is a good thing. Does not fix the problems we're talking about, and I think there's some business things needed to help address it. But I just wanted to give a shout out to the people who took the slings and arrows in order to share their love, and we're not silenced by the haters.
Yeah. No solutions being proposed here, just discussing everything around it. And there is the cold-hearted business side. There's the mechanics of the show and all those things to discuss. But, Jen, I love everything you're saying. You actually get a ForceCenter preach on, not just a well said. But there's something specifically you said I really enjoyed about it, about propping the show up, maybe even beyond your own like of the show. There's some cases out there like that of not just blindly, I love it, but like going, hey, maybe parts of the show didn't work, but I understand what it's doing for a large portion of the fan base or a section of the fan base that has tremendous value. And that is why we here at ForceCenter for years have chosen our words as carefully as we can, even though we record live to tape or often are live. You're going to stumble, but we try to choose how we discuss something, how we break it down, fully acknowledging with empathy and understanding that there's people that really found themselves in a show like this. There's people that found inspiration. And while that does not go away, they're absolutely hurt right now. And they're absolutely angry. And maybe they're striking out. And guess what? That's okay to me. We all got to process this some way. But I like what you said there, Jen. There's so many things, as we'll dive into another question based on the Variety story, that it is beyond frustrating. And these companies, I wish they, without going too far into it, a lot of these companies have have a legion of social media help, companies they hire to monitor these things down to where they're familiar with the very names of problematic personalities, right? They have a list of this person, that person, but not, and it's not they don't like the show. It's they're starting a hashtag that has dangerous and irresponsible and reprehensible connotations and results, right? They track this stuff, but it just feels like nothing changes, right? Just feels like we're stuck in this. And Variety ran a story that addressed the culture war aspect of the show's reviews and some of the reactions to the show, which very much are real, very much exist. And again, we want to fully acknowledge, we always do a ForceCenter caveat, fully acknowledge that not everyone who disliked the show, not everyone who was vocal about disliking the show engaged in this, the review bombs, the bad faith arguments, and other beats of the culture war playbook. I know friends, you know friends, both of you know friends who are just like, oh, I didn't like it, and probably can explain why. They also were relatively quiet about it, by the way, which I think is okay. But this does affect the conversation around the show. And my question is almost comical in its widespread reach here, Joseph, of how can Star Wars or art in general find its way through that? The example we've talked about before is there. I could give you a list of 15 YouTube content creators that I think put bad faith criticism out in the world, or sometimes just straight up culture war bullshit out in the world. I have a problem with them, but the struggle is with the friends I know who are outside of the space, who are relatively normal people. We're all a little weird, but normal people who are big Star Wars fans. They have the shirts they bought at Target. They have the despecialized editions of the original trilogy. They love this stuff. They love this stuff, but they'll tell me, "Oh, that show's bad. It did this. It did that. Did you watch it? No. I watched this channel. I heard it through Facebook. And it definitely affects things, and it's definitely affecting things right now. And I don't know how to get through that, Joseph. So I go to you for the most complicated answer we can find.
Yeah, well, let's see how badly I fumble. Maybe I'll get not renewed for a second question on this episode.
Oh, you're locked in long. You're long term here. You got a long term contract.
Yeah, we've talked about before, and I go to the great wisdom I got from the Sammy Davis Jr.'s biography when I was like 20. It's called Show Business. There's a show and a business, and you are making art You are making stories and myths that move people, and it's a business, and you need to make money at it. And I think those things do need to be balanced. And I think the balance of that has been upset by the streaming situation. I think, as many people talk about in older days, more financial risk was taken to let a show grow. Everybody can list their favorite. Cheers was a dog in its first season, and I believe part of its second season. It never ever would have made it. It would have been canceled, and review bombed because Shelley Long was too thin. Who knows what a horror would have befell it. But I think that the businesses need to give shows time to grow. That comes with a financial risk, and that means valuing the art a little bit more. Another thing that happened traditionally was there were shows that didn't make a ton of money and were never going to make a ton of money, but they were a feather in the cap because they won awards. And that was that balance of show and business and the balance of art. And I think for Acolyte, why can't a giant like Disney say, this is a really important show, this is a really valuable show, maybe it will find a bigger audience in its second season? And if not, maybe it's just valuable artistically to have new characters, new timeline, different voices telling a story from a different perspective, and let's give that a shot. Mando will clean up and Mando will take up a little bit of the business loss. I think we've lost that sort of diversity in the television sphere and also in the movie sphere, where everything needs to be a blockbuster or it's a failure, and there is no middle ground. So that's one part of it for me. Then I'll throw this out quickly. I think in terms of the hate bombing from bad faith people, not people who are like, I like Star Wars, but this one didn't hit for me, and I don't bother to tweet anything mean about it. But for the review bombing, I think the industry needs better metrics to separate it out, so we don't have articles like this from Deadline, Variety, Hollywood Reporter going, maybe the hate bombers killed it. We don't know. They need better metrics so that they can separate out and say this was a business decision. The hate bombing didn't seem to affect the Acolyte for the first couple of weeks. The numbers were high, and then the numbers dropped off. So maybe that does reflect that good faith viewers didn't click with it as much as other shows. But we don't really know because the industry is not doing the work it needs to do to separate and communicate those numbers. The review bombing don't seem to work on the bottom line as well for films. Last Jedi, horrifically attacked, made plenty of money, did great. Captain Marvel, the first Captain Marvel, review bombed, did great money-wise. The Black Panther sequel, Wakanda Forever, review bombed, did great. But streaming shows seem more damaged, like She-Hulk, Miss Marvel, Willow, now The Acolyte. And that might be because at the box office, we all see the numbers, and there's transparency. In the streaming, mystery. But I just do think it's really important for the industry to take responsibility and say, we have metrics to analyze whether this is good faith audiences didn't engage with it, or sorry, the bad faith people beat us, that their message got out there and they tanked the show, and take some responsibility for it.
Yeah. Corporate responbility is it's going back
an easy
to
thing to ask for.
It's an easy thing to ask for. No,
Yeah,
I didn't want to make a joke to belittle anything you said there. I thought it was tremendously valuable and true. I have friends that work at Rotten Tomatoes. I have friends that produce there, write there, host there. It's still bizarre to me that a aggregator that takes everything that's dumped into it becomes a thing on a poster, becomes a thing that can be used against it. To what level in a corporate room? I don't know, but we know Hollywood is, Hollywood in general is full of a bunch of cowards who could possibly go 18%. That's my reputation. Like that stuff, it's real for me to believe something like that could affect it. So this is all, but at the same time, I also think there's just a cold-hearted business side, and I think this is end of the fiscal year. And we got to start making some cuts. You make cuts. We've all been in those meetings, had those jobs. Housekeeping, you got to cut. Security, you got to cut. Marketing, you got to cut. In fact, actually, marketing, you're gone. there's a lot of that seems to be going on right now. But Jen, I bring you in here for this difficult part of the conversation. The culture wars are very real to me. We're in this war. You've seen it. You feel it. You feel it in conversations when you run into those folks who will the go woke, go broke folks will also tell you Revenge of the Sith and Andor are their favorite Star Wars properties. Possibly, Andor the wokest of the woke in many ways politically. So it is frustrating, and even if it doesn't affect every decision in the corporate in the corporate boardrooms, it does affect the morale, the fandoms, and it just seems frustrating.
It's very frustrating because on top of the realities of the business, which is what you guys are talking about, where shows have to have certain, viewership and engagement, and what are they judging this on, and are they going to get a second season, and how much did this cost, and whatever. On top of that, women, people of color, LGBTQIA creators are held up to an unreasonable standard that they have to meet. It has to be a mega blockbuster like Barbie, right? If Barbie had done so-so at the box office, the conversation around it would have been this girl movie held by a female director tanked. Even if it had done like okay numbers. Barbie was Barbie because it blew everything out of the water. But that is kind of an exception. There are tons of mediocre white people shows. Sorry, guys.
I'm surprised it's not actually a show called Mediocre White People Show.
Because they're allowed to be mediocre. It's okay. You're allowed to not have successes, and yet these people get chance after chance after chance. These directors get more and more opportunities. Same with the writers. Same with the actors. If you are a woman or person of color, LGBTQIA actor, whatever. If you are given that opportunity and you don't nail it, you don't get a second chance. And so with the Acolyte, it had to do mega numbers. It did well. And yeah, it dropped off, and maybe it didn't resonate with a lot of people. But I knew, unfortunately, the reality of the business was if it was not a mega success, like, I don't want to say Andor, because Andor was like a critical success. I don't know if it was necessarily like a viewer success.
Numbers-wise, from what we've heard, because as Joseph pointed out, we don't know. Andor, much like Succession, not viewed by a lot of people.
No. But you have
mediocre white guy Kevin James going zoinks while his hot wife goes no is doing still millions of views.
Everything on CBS. No offense. I love my CBS family. I was a page there once. But yeah, I just feel like it's just not fair. It's not fair. If anyone's seen the movie Selena, you'll know the Edward James Olmos speech. We have to be better than them at everything. So yeah, it's just really frustrating.
It's I mean, look at Lexi Alexander as an example. We spoke with her years ago on a show. One Punisher, you get one shot. And guess what? As Joseph touched on earlier, art and business are forever entwined, and sometimes that shot's not messed up by anything you did or anything the film did. It's messed up by a lot of other things, and then you get that one shot. And again, I want to be clear: whether this is all an intentional decision, it doesn't look at the shows that Joseph just listed, right? Miss Marvel, She-Hulk, Willow, tremendously great value in terms of representation, and now this. It's hard not to look at and go, here we go again. Real or not, it's real because of what you're seeing on paper.
Yeah,
it hurts. It hurts a lot of folks, and I like, we're going everywhere in this conversation. I apologize, but
it's all intertwined. It's
all intertwined. Thank you.
Intertwined from just like it's a Star Wars show. It's emblematic of the streaming business. It's a unique and powerful representation of all of these different voices in front of and behind the cameras. It is all three of those things, and I think takes that try to separate it out and make it just one of those are always going to be challenging because it's intertwined. It's the moment we're in.
Yeah. I want to sneak in a little bit more of the business too. Of just there's something. The streaming wars I do think are over, and now it's the pick up the trash wars and find what what services can we now combine? We're reinventing cable, and you can make cynical, hacky stand-up comic jokes. Hell, I probably will this weekend on stage. but it's where we like I can't help but think my first reaction again, because probably a different even perspective than you, Jen, growing up. Like I'm going to see something a little differently right away, maybe unfortunately. But my thought was this business. Here we go. Past Andor, and again Ahsoka, we don't have anything that we know of on the slate other than movies. Could we imagine that there's an animated show in the works? Well, of course, and it would take a few years to get out there anyways. They haven't announced it yet. But we have Mando season 4. We have Favreau saying before the strikes, I finished the scripts. Season 4 is done. Don't you worry. Now it's a movie. No sign of season 4. Lando, we have one creator moved off of it. We have Donald Glover and his brother taking over, and now it's a movie. Sean Levy. If it comes to pass, it's a movie. Taika Waititi, if it still exists, is a movie. We are now seeing disruption becoming destruction, as our friend Ken Plume puts on his bumper sticker or on his car. It's a very, very true statement. Disruption always seems to go into destruction. It comes in with promises. It comes with historic changes, some that are cool, some that we need, some that are valuable, some that will stay, but that it destroys the current structure and leaves everyone broken. This industry is absolutely starting to fall apart. Just had conversations this week with not just a working actor, but someone who you would recognize who's like, I just bought a house and I don't know if I can afford it, and I might have to move, and I might have to go. A working actor of 25 years just became a teacher. Jen, I don't know if this sounds familiar to you.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about frustration. It's about this doesn't exist. And you out there listening to the show might not care because this is our chosen line of work. But this will eventually find you. And this will eventually be a struggle you have. And also a world without art, pretty bleak. And if you're watching the show, you probably like this stuff. And this is part of the concern to me as well. That this is another set of jobs gone. And the streaming wars have taken out everyone to me. And I don't necessarily even have a point, Joseph. I'm just saying it's part of my frustration of hearing this.
I think for me, to make it even larger, there is the corporate thing going on where growth is everything. And that has been, true for a while. And I think to relate it to hits that I think everyone might take because of companies have that growth. You need to always be getting bigger, as opposed to we own a business. It costs, $50 to run it, and we make $100. To me, great business. You're done. But we've now been all the companies believe you have to grow, and I think that's where streaming really was a product of just delusional hubris. Because if you make money from people signing up to your subscription, you are going to reach a window of human beings on the planet. And that's kind of what happened to them all. Like, there's a pie, and the only value is how many humans sign up. And then this shock of like, where's the growth? Like, you had growth in the more traditional model because this specific film took off and then became a franchising thing and a theme park thing in this specific movie. For all these companies to just see like Netflix do this and then to jump on with the idea that there's forever growth. I think one of the best streamers in terms of art right now is Apple.
Yeah.
Because this is not their core business. It's a side thing. And what they've been doing is hiring accomplished showrunners and creators to do a pretty cool creative show, and usually giving them several seasons. And I think that the other streamers need to find a financial way that's palatable to them to get back to investing in seasons of television. I think the greatest failure of the streaming wars has been the half movie, half special event television show. And I don't even think that's on creators. I think like the Acolyte, I think was given a budget and said, this is the scope of budget you have, and we demand this many episodes. And the creators did the best they could to kind of divide it up. But then I think the Acolyte took some hits because we've been seeing lots of these shows that kind of feel like a movie that's been expanded, and you wait a week and you think a week, and then it's like it's a half an hour and the story doesn't advance that much and you get real frustrated. And I think that is an overall failing of the streaming era. And I think the Acolyte took an extra hit because it's at the tail end of that process. And I think the thing that is going to die is that model. Shows that do like 10, 12 episodes and have a pretty traditional beginning, middle, and end in the episode are the streaming shows that have done well. And I think that the model needs to get back to that in terms of hope for the industry.
Yeah, and from the ashes might rise something new, and like I said, some of the stuff is I'm always up for something new. I'm also always in an interesting way to call a car for a ride. Now I can't get those cars. Now they're too expensive. Now drivers cancel on me in my front door, and I can't even call a cab. You know, so disruption leads to destruction, and it will find you in some way or another. And yeah, Joseph, I try to find hope, and it's hard. It's hard right now. It's absolutely hard, and this is part of it. This is part of why I want to talk about the business side of it, and also just the realities. This is not. I want to be clear, not to take away from anything about the discussion about what the show represents and now what is missing. Jen, you're bringing some very valuable things to the table with that are both on your Instagram feed and here, even though it's exhausting and what you're having to deal with in your comment sections. But I also think there's a business reality, and look at the writing on the wall. Disney, it will be Disney, Warner, ESPN, Discovery, Hulu Plus, and we all make jokes, but that's where we're going. I'm already like this week I have to figure out how to sign up for the new like $30 get them all one, because I'm being bled to death on having all these streaming services that I watch once a year. This is all, and it's all this. You talk about a toxic hamster wheel, Jen. We're in this technology hamster wheel that is just bleeding us all dry, and that's part of this decision. That has to be to me, and it could be suddenly. It could be very sudden. I believe some of the stories, if more comes out, I could be convinced that they're fact of hey, some stuff were in the works and it suddenly got pulled out. I just dealt with this House of the Dragon. House of the Dragon second season is a great season. It ends in a little weird beat that caused a lot of discourse, a lot of hashtags, a lot of hate for the writers, a lot of hate for the showrunner. Well, it kind of turns out at the last minute, in like pre-production, ready to go to set, Warner Brothers said cut 2 episodes. And the battle of the gullet, which is this big thing that's coming, was going to be the end. Now it's not the end, and so no one, that doesn't factor into the conversation around the show, and so that's part of my frustration in the business too. If I'm making any sense here, it's like is these showrunners, Joseph, like you said, they're having to, the fact that a showrunner has to go on an interview circuit to beg for a second season to me, and it's real. It's not a joke. That's part of a bigger problem to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's in terms of hope for the future, let me ask you both this. Like, for years and years, we lived with no Star Wars, but like as a Star Trek fan or a superhero fan, in traditional television in the 90s and the early 2000s, the creatives, executives would just make a pick and they'd run with it, and it would run for a season and maybe get canceled or maybe be a hit and run for 7. How would you feel if Star Wars took a step back and said, okay, Mando is wrapping up in this movie, Ahsoka is leading to the movie? What if the next year they're just like, we're gonna pick a show and we're gonna put our bets on it, and this show's gonna run for 3 seasons, and some fans are gonna love it and some fans aren't, and move away from this putting out as many shows, and just kind of go back to a model of, if you like Star Wars, this is what we have for new material right now. Jen, how would you feel about that?
I was just thinking about the realities of making a Star Wars show. And I go back to George Lucas, and one of the reasons why he did not make a Star Wars show was because he didn't feel like he'd be able to get the quality of visual effects and the production value that he would want in a TV format. And I think it's interesting because The Mandalorian came out the gate using the volume, which, cut production costs. It made it possible to make this Star Wars show. And it was a mega hit. And that set a standard that going forward, I imagine that the budgets had to be a certain amount, right? But I think even audiences after a time started commenting on how, quote unquote, small the shows felt. They kind of felt the feeling that it was on the volume, and it didn't feel as cinematic as, say, that we're used to with Star Wars in the movie theater. Andor felt very cinematic. Andor was expensive, right? And I don't know if Andor would have been greenlit now maybe because of the critical acclaim. But for me, when I look at The Acolyte, which felt very cinematic, it was an expensive show. I think that that's scary as a business model for Lucasfilm and Disney. And I think that they're putting the brakes on because I think that they perhaps believe that Star Wars looks better on the big screen. And we may very well not be getting that many Star Wars shows in the future. I don't know. I mean, I bristled against some of the looks of the volume. So it's like, do you want
Same.
all the shows to kind of look like the volume? Which fine, but then you have to accept that those are the kinds of TV shows that we're going to get for Star Wars. Or do we want to pull back and get more cinematic Star Wars on the big screen? But then that leads with its own set of problems. What type of characters are you going to have on the big screen, right? Who's going to go see these Star Wars movies and get people out into the theaters? Well, if you don't have the competition on the streaming services with Star Wars shows and you only put Star Wars in theaters, there you go. So I think Star Wars TV shows, I don't want to say are going to end, but I think that the tide is changing.
I think they're going to look different. I would be. I think I am more open to different budget realities than other people. I think things have looked so phenomenal at this point with CGI and growing up in an era where most films in the theater are blockbusters that I think a lot of people have grown up with. Like, well, it should look good. It always looks good, and I'm still used to that one of the greatest episodes of Doctor Who on an emotional level, the alien is literally made of bubble wrap painted green. I think I have a slightly different attitude from my perspective. Like, you know what? Give me the Mon Mothma's procedural. Give me, Law in Coruscant that only takes place in hallways. I don't care. It's Star Wars, right? Or do made for streaming movies and do 2-part, blockbusters that are like, it's not as great as a movie theater film, but it's good. If the story of Acolyte had been 2 made for streaming movies, to me it's partially that there is an onus on the companies to set expectations and say, this is what we're serving you, like a restaurant of like, come to our greasy dive bar for a greasy cheeseburger that will get all over your shirt versus come to our fine dining. There's going to be art on your plate and it's going to be a plate this big with one little piece of fish. Expectations need to be set about the meal you're being served.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm with you on all of it here too. I've always been a fan of, hey, give me a new show every month. I don't care. I love to sit down and watch it. And then maybe that slowed for a little bit in my soul for me. And Jen, I'm with you. There was times where, it doesn't look maybe how you'd want a Star Wars film to look, but even that's kind of perspective and experience and maybe unrealistic desires. I don't know. It definitely is factored into it. But to your original question, Joseph, I think at this point, I don't know what that show would be. I think even has to be wider than like an Andor, which is definitely tied to the big picture of Star Wars, but focuses on a little chapter. But if there's a one big event series a year that goes for a bit, I think now more than ever I'd be on board for it just to see. But a lot of the stuff too really does go beyond Lucasfilm for me and Star Wars. It goes into the state of the industry, which is why I wanted to bring it up there. One big final section to talk about here, and we can go wherever you all want to go after that, of course. But Variety talked about how the show was challenging many ideas about and around the Jedi, and that this may have upset some fans just as much as it pleased others. Specifically, they said some critics and fans loved how the show challenged the traditional perception of the Jedi as infallible and wholly virtuous, as embodied by the emotional, self-serving choices made by Jedi Master Sol. That's in a Variety article. Who is responsible for moving Osha from her family and causing her separation from her sisters. This is a Business Reporter review. And other fans, however, felt those creative choices were antithetical to the good versus evil nature of Star Wars storytelling and strongly objected to the show's expansion of the mythology of the Force. So, hey, look, without a doubt, the show asked some tough questions because we attempted to answer them every week, and we had some good discussions here. Jen, you brought in so many valuable things, so many valuable insights and perspective. Joseph, your Justice for the Jedi runs deep, and we had some wonderful discussions. But do we think that the content of a fully conceived, written, and produced show led to it not continuing? How realistic is that? And I'm talking about 70-30, 60-40, 100-0. I don't know. Jen, I start with you, who was very passionate about your love of this show and what it felt to watch it. Not just, hey, you liked it in terms of Star Wars, but you really loved it, what it meant for you and your journey on this earth. So I start with you here on this tough question.
I think there was a lot of risks taken in this show that people were very challenged by, a lot of canon things that people really did not like.
Birthdays.
Yeah, right? Which seemed so silly on the surface, and yet people felt very disrespected by that. So I think that Disney looked at it and was like calculating the budget, calculating the risks. Did it pay off? And in the end, I think that they probably felt like, no, it did not pay off. It was not worth doing a second season and shelling out that money when it was kind of divisive. I think that a lot of studios and businesses, they don't like conflict. They don't like drama. They want their shows to be successes and everyone to love it. And when it doesn't, they're like, they're like Homer Simpson backing away into the bushes, right? That's kind of how it feels. Like they're like, is there a second season? I don't know. So I think that, yeah, this is a bigger issue. And you know what I've been thinking a lot about? Who is Star Wars for? I feel like Star Wars is having a real not branding issue, because like Star Wars is like a older generation, right? It's a nostalgia thing. There are a lot of 30 and beyond year old fans. But where are the kids there? Like, I know that the kids were around with Rey, certainly. I mean, there were lots of young kids. And and the Young Jedi Adventures, obviously. But when I go to my kids' school, I don't see a lot of kids with Star Wars merchandise. And not to say that that's an indicator, but it just feels like if we want Star Wars to continue, who are we going to appeal to as an audience? Like, I loved The Acolyte because it did appeal to older fans, and I think it's important. And if they want to do this going forward, they should have different shows that appeal to different people. But I do wonder, like, what are they thinking? And maybe that's why they're now pulling back, and they are just going to focus on the skeleton crew in Mando and Grogu and kind of take it back to make it be more family friendly, get the younglings in, make it the safe Star Wars that you know and love, which, okay, great. That's good knowing going forward, right? But it's going to be hard for me now that I've had a taste of the dark side with The Acolyte to kind of go back. I don't know.
No, I think it's an honest answer there. Yeah, and you know, Skeleton Crew being next up, and that's going to be an interesting journey and a show decidedly not for kids, but decidedly full of younger energy and younger ideals. Joseph, you know, I do want to bring you in for, you know, there's some truth in this Variety article. I'm slightly cynical about it, but you know, it definitely had a lot of conversation around it because we're in it every week. I'm curious about those. You know, my fiance Grace we're actually set to start watching the show. She hadn't seen it yet. We're set to start watching it this week. She's not aware of a lot of this stuff, other than her sister said, "You're going to really like this show." But it did raise some questions, but I don't think they were all completely new questions. And I don't think the questions themselves are bad. Even some of the answers, even all the answers. This was an interesting show in that regard. But how realistic is it to you that you think this would actually affect it?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers between, you know, how much was it damaged by bad faith, hateful review bombing versus how much was this like Star Wars fans of every level, from, you know, in depth to kind of casual, gave it a shot and we're like, I like it. Okay. I don't know. We don't know those numbers. So it's hard for me. I think that it is realistic that the show was challenging in lots of ways. Andor is challenging in that it's gritty, but everybody's clamoring for gritty and raw and real and frankly, you know, a more adult style of dialogue, a more toned down on the pulp elements of Star Wars. So you can kind of look at Andor and go, it's gritty, it's hard, it's challenging. But it's not gritty, hard, and challenging when everybody's standing up going, give me that exact kind of gritty, hard, and challenging. I think Acolyte was challenging in a, like, not press release challenging way, in an actually challenging way, because it fulfilled that promise of the Star Wars buffet where you get lots of different flavors. And again, to me, I think what was challenging about the Acolyte in a good way, and maybe for some people not a good way, is it's a tragedy. And I think there are maybe glimmers and sparks of hope at the end, but not a ton. Even Revenge of the Sith, absolute, tragedy fest, ends with, but baby Luke staring at the horizon. There's still hope. Tune in next time. And I think that's what was challenging about Acolyte, and I kind of mourn that we don't get that kind of challenging. I will desperately try to keep this short, but this discussion in Variety about challenging the traditional perception of the Jedi as infallible and wholly virtuous kind of makes me want to flip a table. The framing so gets on my nerves that Lucas started challenging the Jedi 25 years ago in The Phantom Menace. The Last Jedi challenged them 7 years ago. I think the challenge of the Last Jedi was the message of the Last Jedi is Luke realized, like, no, the Jedi are needed. They are good. Even if it's painful that we can fail sometimes, we need to try. But many people walked away from it going, see, Luke knows the truth. Jedi are garbage. Yeah. That part of it was not new. If anything, the presentation of the Jedi as flawed and creepy felt like been there, done that. And I had a lot of people in my life go, I've always thought they were creepy ass children stealers and religious cops. And the show proved everything. So is it challenging? Yes, but it's also, for me, I think not fresh ground in portraying the Jedi. The last thing I'll say about it is there was an interview published on StarWars.com with Leslie Headland, like pretty quickly after the finale. And Leslie Headland says a bunch of stuff about the show that I really enjoyed. She said, one aspect that I was very interested in exploring in the show was, depending on the way you look at it, anyone can be the bad guy. She said, my goal is to see Jedi as human beings or as aliens with the emotions we ascribe to humans. I wanted them to make them a little bit more fallible. She also says, the theme of the show of duality and reflection, so the good guys also have to admit that parts of them that are bad. I don't see the Jedi as antagonists. I see them as flawed, and it was a story that I felt really excited to tell. I love all that, and I think that's an accurate description of the show. When I watch the show, I see those Jedi are noble. They're on a noble path, but many of them make really bad choices and really bad mistakes. But then I also see the witches. Very cool. And I see their point of view, and I see that they were violated. I also see Mother Coral is really angry and violent and escalates things and tells a child to lock everyone in and stop her sister from making her own life choices. I think the presentation of the show is that the Jedi and the witches and maybe even Chimere, they all see themselves as making good choices, but they all make some bad choices. They all make some flawed choices. They all hurt one another. I love that that's the show. What I heard a lot from the fandom is because the Jedi are the heroes, because the Jedi are the institution and the order and the authority, people walked away from the show going, I'm not talking at all about any mistakes that the witches might have made. This is a show about the Jedi and their mistakes, which I understand because they're the authority. And Jennifer, you said some really wise and helpful things about the Jedi as the authority and the dominant force. So it makes sense that we would focus more on their mistakes and critique them. But in terms of, was the show challenging about the Jedi? I think for Leslie Headland to say in this interview that my intent is to show that it's a tragedy where everyone involved could potentially be seen as the bad guy. I feel like what a lot of audience members were left with is the Jedi are the bad guys, period. So that's my way of working through, were people challenged by the perception of the Jedi? And I think in some respects they were, because it was a challenging show and a tragedy, and there weren't a lot of fist pumping moments for the Jedi, and there's a lot of focus on them because they are the authority and the heroes of Star Wars.
Yeah, if anything, I was going to check what bubbles you might get stuck in, but even just going on a place like Facebook, it was a lot of the fist pumping was, like you said, finally these a-holes and rubes have been exposed, and again, fun stuff to discuss. challenging in the sense of, like I said, you said, Jed, you brought a lot of wonderful things to the table that changed my understanding of the show as well. One of the things here that I think I'm thinking about is just, I just don't think anything on the show would make them go, all right, time to pack it in. They we don't know all those details. The Trevorrow being pulled off 9 might have had to do with his view of Luke, the Force, or something like that. But that's become urban legend that we can't actually prove until some book with actual quotes or a documentary comes out. Like, we don't know.
His movie also tanked very, very badly.
The movie also tanked.
Yeah.
There's a lot to these conversations. I struggle. Was Book of Boba Fett ever could it have had a second season? Sure. Was it ever thought of other than we need to do this right now? It needs to be kind of a 2.5 for business reasons, for Pedro reasons, whatever it might be. We'll never get that full story. I don't know. I would love to one day. And also, Joseph, you're echoing some of the frustrations I have had in the last 10 years. Not generally speaking, but there's been moments where I'm like, oh yeah, you didn't like The Last Jedi. Got it. Cool. Clearly you misunderstood Return of the Jedi. Oh, you didn't like episode 9? I hear what you're saying. You didn't understand some of the stuff in the third act of episode 8. Now in this case, I'm like, you maybe didn't watch the prequels. Maybe you didn't watch what was going on in 3 movies there. So that's almost outside of this business conversation and this the implications of The Lost Jedi. I don't know. Bring some sanity back to me, Jen.
Oh, I think you're making so much sense. I don't think that anything, the content or any of that, I really don't think that was a reason why they're like, yep, this show sucks. We're not doing another one. I just think it's money. I think it's money. I think that the viewership was fine. I just think it's the state of the industry. It's just business. And I didn't mention this on the show, but the whole D23 thing, and I was surprised by how much of a presence Lucasfilm had at D23. And I didn't want to say this, but I did see some chatter online after the fact talking about Disney parks. And people who are massive Disney parks fans were talking about how, here we go again. They share all the things that they're going to be doing, all these rides, all these lands. But the reality is they don't have the space to create all these rides and lands. How are you going to actually do it? And we said that it's been a pattern with Disney parks where they share this information to get people excited. Hey, we're growing, we're building things, we're doing this. And then it never materializes. And I had this sinking feeling in my stomach where I was like, oh, Lucasfilm had this big presence at D23. Is it possible that some of this stuff is not gonna, I don't know. I just was like, is the wool being pulled over our eyes where it's like, yeah. We're don't worry. We're doing Star Wars stuff. Don't worry. We got it. We heard you. Yeah. Here's Manny Jacinto. And it's like, oh no, it's not, because that's the reality of the business. You want to share this positivity for your investors and things like that. But the reality is there's no land. There's not enough money for streamers, right? So it's just like that transparency that we talk about. It's so important. And unfortunately, we're not going to get it anytime soon.
It's not that the business hasn't always been a business, but I as much as I enjoyed in May of 2020, I think was Investor Day for this one, right? Acolyte was greenlit in another era. Let's not forget that. Another era of entertainment that moves so fast. It's not this. It's just I still sometimes find it. This goes to the overall and the digital media landscape too, which we are very much a part of and are very much not going away. Duality, complicated. That we were celebrating an Investors Day. That would have been bonkers to me a long time ago. And I think I still own some stock. Right? I could dial into that number and hear Uncle Bob in his sweater. It's still bizarre to me that we're celebrating news announced on a day for the investors to get excited to invest more. And Jen, that I don't know if that proves. No one could prove what you're saying, but I feel you on that. And Joseph, what you said earlier, there's only so much growth to be made in the streaming world when we're competing for dollars. And I don't know if anyone's looked outside the walls. World's not been great the last few years worldwide. A lot of things going on, a lot of money concerns, a lot of stuff beyond just our own country here in the United States. So they're competing for all of that, and there's only so far they can go. But man, look over here. Yeah. Invest.
Was it? It was 2020. Was that when it was?
I was trying to look up on Wikipedia. I do believe they said it was announced during Disney Investor Day in 2020. I thought I remembered something even earlier in 2019, but Bernstein Bears and all that stuff. I don't remember what is true or not.
Yeah, I can't remember. But, yeah, my memory believes it was pre-lockdown portion of pandemic, but.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the series title, logo, all that stuff was revealed at investors meeting on December 10th, 2020.
Well, my memory
is officially announced May of 2020 at StarWars.com.
Okay,
well,
there we go. My memory is wrong.
There is something else that I do believe is a factor, not necessarily with the Acolyte per se, but I just feel like, with the Black Lives Matter movement and kind of the racial justice uprising that happened around 2020, right? It pushed companies to be like, oh no, don't worry. Yeah. We believe in inclusivity. Sure. Here's some shows, here's some content, here's our people, employees that work for the company, right? Because if they did not do that, they were being called out big time. So I think we saw a big push of that type of content. And then now we're kind of with the aftermath of it, where companies, I don't want to say are getting scared, but it's like I said with Barbie, unless it's a mega blockbuster, they're going to be like, let's not, we're going to go back to what we know. They're not going to take the risks anymore. And so it's a little troubling. And obviously, like, I'd have to have numbers and stats to prove this. Again, I just have hunches and kind of like, what does my husband call it? I don't know. He's always like, what's your evidence? What's your evidence? I don't know. Maybe I could conduct a research study on my evidence. I'm sure Gina Davis is it her institute? Could probably do a study on this. But I have noticed a little trend of that.
Yeah. I really agree with you both that, I mean, it seems like Leslie Headland had a good relationship. The sort of the promo machine of the Acolyte was very, excited. There were some, I think huge wins in terms of engagement. The Yord Horde, the Jecki Jam, the thrill over, episode 5 of Chimere and his arms, and the horror show of a Sith, I think he's a Sith. I know some people disagree. Chewing through Jedi, like there were some huge wins for this show, but I feel like the decision may be influenced by the hate mobs, but it probably is just a numbers of like, it started strong and it dipped off, so maybe people aren't interested. What that doesn't take into account is, I think, what you're talking about, Jennifer, is it's this show, to me, based on some things you said, and I would love to get your insights. It feels like it wasn't just a diversity show where it's about who's on screen. It was truly a show that was about characters in the context of Star Wars Galaxy who felt marginalized and suppressed by the institution of power that is the Jedi. And then even within that institution of the Jedi, different people struggling with, I need to be true to this order, but I need this thing for myself. And like, it felt like a story that was not, that was telling a different perspective as a story. And that seemed to be the way a lot of people were responding to it. And I feel like there is some a need for the company to acknowledge that's what they were making and maybe treat it with some extra respect, because it wasn't just another Star Wars show in a lot of ways. I don't want to be taking anything you have said out of context. Do you feel like
I totally agree. Yeah, I'll save some of that for my closing argument, if you will. Your Honor. But yeah, no, I mean, when I just look at it on the surface, I'm like, people have been asking for, like, Knights of the Old Republic, and like let's focus on the Sith, let's focus on the villains, let's do the dark side. And it's like, here we got that. And I thought it was done so well, because it presented this dark side as not just like the scary, bros in masks, duking it out. It's like, this is the dark side. This is a very relatable dark side. There were many different sides of the dark side that were presented, and I just thought it was so smart. And it's such a shame that we're not going to get to see any more of it. It just felt so right and original, and balancing that with trauma, which is like the question. It's like when you look at Palpatine, as we talked about before in our what was it? What were we talking about? Cues of the
Who
Force.
knows?
One of our episodes.
It's tomorrow. It's actually coming out tomorrow. So
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, our episode tomorrow, with Palpatine. Palpatine is a fun, pulpy villain, and he's very charming. But at the end of the day, like, if I came across a Palpatine or Sheev, I would know that guy was up to something. I'm not going to trust him. What, the chimeras of the world? Oh my gosh, it's a story as old as time, right? I just thought that was it was genius. It was a genius way to approach the dark side. But for whatever reason, well, we know why. Some people just did not like that.
And that's the part that feels so incomplete to me, because I think it is so. You spoke eloquently about how cathartic it was when Osha finally found out the truth and let go of all of that, or released all of that anger and pain in the stop talking. Cathartic, powerful, meaningful. But then, like, does she get any joy out of the choice of being with Chimere? Are there moments of actual passion that they hinted at, or does she pretty quickly go, I had to make this sacrifice to save my sister, but this is hell and I regret it. Like, the story via Osha of what is the dark side could have gone, I think, even deeper, in that is the part of it that almost, like, on a thematic level feels unfinished, and to me, like, one of the great tragedies of not having that story continue.
And in many ways, Chimera, perhaps one of the more dangerous villains ever to be in Star Wars, because he's convinced a lot of folks to follow that path. He's
come to the dark side. We have biceps. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait to the conversation start in my house, even after the show has gone away. We're going to be watching it. That is kind of the final question I want to get at. Jen's closing statement, as you said. We got the business, and there's some realities to it. There's some harsh realities. There's some sad realities. We've got the changing landscape of this business, which is very real and very destructive. We've got maybe a show that has too many questions, maybe a show that didn't ask enough. Who knows? All that stuff might come out in the wash. And, hey, look, maybe someone will speak. Maybe someone will sit down for a tell-all interview. I don't know. But what I do want to end on here is what ForceCenter has always been about. How these shows affect us, how these shows move us, inspire us, challenge us, hurt us in a good way. It hurts so good. This is a show that meant a lot to a lot of folks, as every piece of Star Wars storytelling is, right? You can find your Solo fans, your Rogue One fans, your Last Jedi fans, your Rise fans, your Young Adventures fans. That's why we love this franchise. That's why we return every week, even when we're hurt by the realities of it. Right? Even when we're no more Solo, or all those kind of things, or we don't know what Kenobi and Qui-Gon will talk about. All those kind of things. We keep coming back because of what it means to our soul. So I wanted to close and talk about what is the loss of the show to the Star Wars universe. What is that really doing to us as a fandom? What's the loss, Joseph, here as we wrap up this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the big themes of the show was that whole choice versus destiny. And I feel like in some ways the story of Osha and May, what I can kind of take from the tragedy of them finding one another, coming together, to me, having that gift of the Magi, both trying to make whatever sacrifice the other needs so that they can have what they truly want, is a great tragedy. It's a great structure, but it leaves these two characters, once again, totally enmeshed in the system of the Jedi and the Sith, and those orders and those dogmas, and wondering, will those characters ever break free of systems and make choices as individuals or as sisters? I think for me, that's the loss, because if this was a one and done, that would be the message. I don't finish reading Romeo and Juliet and going, but if it had a sequel, would it work out? That's the point of Romeo and Juliet. The loss to me is this feels like a chapter for Osha and May. I don't know if it's the point of Osha and May, and maybe it is, and maybe Leslie Headland's giving an interview right now saying, "Yep, no, that's it." But to me, it felt like more. And I think from my own point of view as a fan, that is the tragedy. The other tragedy, which is not as serious, is I pre-ordered a bleeping Jedi Master Soul action figure in April or May. And I already have to deal with the tragedy of the man made some bad choices, even though I think his heart was in the right place. I have to look at the action figure and deal with that tragedy. And now, months later, it's going to be, here's your favorite dead character from a show that is not renewed. We want to give you our money. We want to vote with our dollars.
There hasn't been a
together and let
chimera.
us do a capitalism. Like,
Let us do a capitalism. There hasn't been a shirtless stranger figure yet, right?
Yeah.
That's going to go flying off the shelves.
Why a stranger figure wasn't announced for pre-order the day after episode 5? I'm kind of joking, but it is a business thing too.
Yes.
If you're gonna, if shows fates are gonna hang on capitalism, on money, then for those of us who do choose to vote with our dollars, then give us the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, we could have a entire conversation about the toy industry, right? And how it relates to all this too, because it's very much there.
Well, in a book coming out now that's going to feel extra painful to have the Acolyte, blazing across the front cover of that Vernestra book.
Oh yeah! Wow.
And you're right. As painful as that book will be, I hope to God they don't pull that book back. Right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. For me, the loss of the show, you've all here today really talked about some of what the show means and what could be the questions left unanswered, like you're saying, Joseph. There, this was a interesting challenge for me every week, where I felt that I love the show. I was so excited for the show. I was a big champion of the show, and I remain one because it was also one of the shows I looked around and was like, it's not hitting all the notes for me, and then I had to pull back and realize, that's okay, because that's probably intentional for this show. This show's it's playing other music. And to be in a room with Star Wars fans, whether figurative or just out there in the social media space, to look around and hear everyone else getting the notes, it means a lot to me as a longtime Star Wars fan. It means a lot to me as someone who's been working with both of you here in ForceCenter now over 10 years, to talk about everyone's experiences, even if it isn't necessarily yours directly. You are not the main character at every story, and there's great value that this show had for so many people. And I want to be clear, the diversity word always comes up. Leslie Headland herself, at one point during the interview process, was saying, I'm sick of that word. This isn't a diverse story; it's a story. And it's important to have these things going on. But even Jen, like you said, that can end up sometimes cynical, right, with the corporate activism and everything. This was just a great story for a lot of people. And I love being around there every week to see the people being moved by it. You, Jen, Molly Damon, 1 week, both of you put out some stuff that I was like, I hadn't thought of that, because why would I think about that? That's not my life. That's not my path. That's not my existence. I have to be aware of it. I have to be understanding of the other perspectives at this table. And that's what I love what this show did. And I was looking forward to all the questions that the second season could have asked. I was looking forward to the answers. What is Yoda going to say? What is he going to say? He's got 100 years to figure out this problem. What is Plagueis going to do? I was looking forward to that. So, Chimere, tell me about your friend. Who is this friend you got here? I was looking forward to that. I can guess how it ends up, because we know we've been there in the balcony with Palpatine going, "Ooh, it's a great story. Let me tell you how I killed my master." I can figure all that out, but I feel the loss of the show is about those that were absolutely moved and inspired from it. And again, I want to be clear, there's things in it I absolutely love and we're inspired by. I always find something. That's our point here every week. What is the show saying to us, and how can you connect it to your own life? But for me, it was looking around and going, I need to make sure that these folks are getting to connect with these stories week after week, and that was part of my joy. But that's the loss for me on a lot of levels. And there's the fun kind of Star Wars of it all. And I don't like when something in Star Wars ends when maybe it shouldn't, for whatever the reason, business or otherwise. Jen, you can address the jury now. You have your closing. What is the loss of the show to the Star Wars universe?
I brought evidence today, Your Honor. So I was going through my old photos from when I was a kid, and I found this one. I was like about 2 years old here, I think, maybe less than 2 years old. And that's my mom, that's me. And you'll notice the doll that's here, which is like a blonde white doll. And what was shocking was as I'm going through these old photos from when I was a baby up until like, I don't know, 8 or 9, photo after photo of me with blonde white dolls. And it was a moment where I was like, oh, like I've talked about this on the show often. I've talked about it in my real life, but it was a moment where it was just like an image that was so crystal clear for me about why I felt invisible, why I hated myself, not just from the external, like people being prejudiced or telling me terrible things about my skin, but the things that I loved and I cherished were not me. It didn't look like me. I literally always felt othered by my own damn toys. I always felt, even with Star Wars, being a girl, being a brown kid, like outside the window. I mean, literally when I was a part of the club in my high school, I felt like it was all guys, white guys. And I would kind of stand in the doorway because I felt embarrassed to be a part. I felt like they were going to judge me and I just didn't feel comfortable being there. But I wanted to hear what they were going to say. And them talking about Wedge Antilles, because that was what the club was called. And just being like, oh, I want to be a part of that, And so when I found the Star Wars community, I was like, yay, I'm a part of something. But then I was made very clear by this fan base that we've seen, that we've talked about today, that you are not one of us. You are other, right? And then 2015 came around with Rey. And I went to Star Wars Celebration and I went to Comic-Con and I saw these little girls, all different types of little kids wearing these Rey costumes. And I was like, they believe they can be the hero. That was something I never believed. I never believed that as a kid. And these types of pictures are why. And I really had hope for the future of Star Wars. And when the Acolyte came, I was like, this is fantastic. Yes, it was about the representation, but it was that we were allowed to exist in space. And when people were like, this is shoehorning it in, I'm like, but I just want to be a part of the party. I just want to be here. Why am I not allowed to be here? Is it because you're used to only seeing yourself, that only you guys are allowed to exist in Star Wars stories? We've been here. I mean, I think about the queer kids who are scared to share themselves. Seeing someone like Leslie Headland show running a Star Wars show, how powerful that is, right? And so the value of this show is for so many people, so many different types of people to be seen and reflected and their voices valued. And so that is why I go back to the whole cancellation, verbiage. It is important to handle the language around the show with care because of what it represented to fans. And if we as a Star Wars community want to be inclusive, we need to be vocal, and Disney and Lucasfilm need to be more proactive. And they've been pretty good. We've made tremendous progress, but I believe if Star Wars is going to continue and we want it to be an inclusive, welcoming space for not just us older fans, but new fans as well, right? The young people, they are very much more inclusive and welcoming with each other, and we need to be as well, and we need to be just as vocal about it. So I really hope that we won't go back, because that's my fear. I feel like we've made tremendous progress in Star Wars, and it feels like we're going back. So I don't know. Sorry, there's not much there, but you know what I mean? I just was struck by these pictures that I found. I was like, oh my gosh.
Case closed, Jen. Case closed.
Yeah.
Beyond well said. Beyond well said. Real powerful.
I think it's really, it is helpful and powerful to reframe the discussion to, this is just about inviting everyone to the party. I think that's incredibly well said and really important, because we can get lost in the weeds of numbers and review bombing. And I think we're seeing some of this in a shift in political discourse to get back to basics of, is this a radical form of government or is it helping your damn neighbor? And I think it is very valuable and powerful for you to remind us this is just about being kind and sharing and letting everyone be a part of the party. There's nothing to be afraid of, when you look at it that way. There's only things to be excited about when you look at it that way, as let's have everyone at the party.
Mm-hmm. The Jedi way.
Well said indeed. Well, we came to discuss some news, some business news, but as with everything in Star Wars, it's beyond just what's on the screen, what's in the papers. The reason this franchise has gone on, approaching 50 years, is because it means so much, and we want it to continue to mean everything to everybody. And we're going to continue to throw our ForceCenter party here, all invited. So that is it for now. We'll see. Get back to normal programming tomorrow with some questions, some of which have to do with the Acolyte. Going to be, or that's on Thursday. What day is it? Thursday, I think it's coming out here. Check your local listings. Remember TV guides? Those are gone.
God, no.
All right, everybody. That's it. We're ForceCenter. You can find us on social media, ForceCenter Pod. Our Facebook page is ForceCenter Podcast. We're Instagram, here on YouTube. Subscribe if you would. Podcast available a lot of different spots. Just search, you'll find us. Merch currently available at tpublic.com/user/ForceCenter. You can support us directly at patreon.com/ForceCenter. There you can get into our Discord where, there's a lot of passions, a lot of hurt. They're having a needed discussion. A needed processing in the ForceCenter Discord right now for a show that was really loved by our listeners here and viewers. So that's it for now. You can follow me at Ken Napzok. Go to my website, kennapzok.com for more. Joseph, where can they find and follow you?
Yeah, you can find me on all the social media at Joseph Scrimshaw, and check out my website, josephscrimshaw.com, for links to film info and my blog. New entry today. My blog is called Finish Your Monsters, so check that out if you're interested.
There you go. And Jen, where can they find and follow you? Though sometimes maybe you don't want that.
You can find me nowhere. Listen, I'm going back to Doll World after this. I'm going back to my Blythe doll dioramas where, unsurprisingly, there's drama in that fan base as well. You can see my journey into both Star Wars and Doll World at Jennifer Landa, or TikTok at Jennifer Landa 1138.
There it is. Hey, we'll see you next time here on ForceCenter.